Welcome to the last topic of this particular section, and in this topic I'm going to talk about S3 security, and this is going to be the agenda. So I'll start with IAM. So in IAM I'll talk about identity based policy and resource based policy for S3, which is also called as bucket policy. If you don't know about IAM, please go through the IAM video in the appendix section and then come back to this topic again. So after I'm going to talk about VPC endpoint also, and then S3 access points, which I touched upon in the previous topic. And then finally, I'll talk about pre-signed URLs, and then I'll conclude this particular topic and the section. So IAM, which is basically identity and access management, and it is used to authenticate and authorize users to work with AWS services. So authentication is basically get into the system, and authorization is when after you get into the system, what resources of the system you are allowed to access. And in AWS, IAM is used for both of them. S3 authorization is done using IAM policies, and authentication is done using IAM user, which is similar for all the services. What is done is that IAM users are created and use those IAM users to authenticate ourselves and to get into the AWS console. So once we get into AWS console, then we have to use IAM policies to authorize the IAM user to use S3 buckets, objects, etc. Then there are two types of IAM policies. One is identity based policy, and if you have gone through the IAM section, whatever I have talked about in IAM, those are all identity based policies. So what is identity based policy? Basically, we create IAM policies or IAM permissions and attach those permissions to a particular user. And then the user would get access to the resources that are mentioned in the policy. So that's what identity based policy is. So we have an IAM user, we create an IAM policy and attach that IAM policy to the IAM user. And the user would get access based on the permissions which are defined in the policy. Now in identity based policy, we use here or effect action resource. So we define the effect. So basically, whether I'm allowing access or denying access, then the action, basically the API actions that we can do, for example, creating S3 buckets, creating, uploading S3 objects, creating EC2 instances, etc. Then we define the resource, on which resource these things are applied, on which resources the effect and actions are applied. So this is how we create identity-based policy. Then we have resource-based policy, and this is also called as bucket policies in S3. Now this is opposite, and the policy is attached to the resource rather than to the user. And in the policy we mention the resource and the user who can access this resource. So instead of year, we have ERP, wherein we mention effect action resource followed by principal. Principal is basically the user who is given access to use this resource. Effect, as I already mentioned, it is basically either allow or deny. Then resource is the AWS bucket or the S3 bucket or a particular folder or an object. And principal is the user whom the access has to be given to. So in that case, what would be the actions? And the actions are S3 API actions. And these are some of the actions that I have mentioned. And of course, it is not at all an exhaustive list. You can Google S3 IAM actions, then you'll find a lot of actions available. You don't have to go into too much of details. I'm just showing you how IAM works with S3. Now in S3 actions, I have mentioned create bucket, which is basically to create a bucket, delete a bucket, then copy object, which is used to copy object from one place to another, delete object, get object, put object is used to upload an object or upload a file, list all buckets is used to list all the buckets for a particular account, and list bucket itself is used to list all the objects inside of a specific bucket. And then we have commands like describe, which is used only for read purposes. Now these are some of the S3 actions that we'll be using in our hands-on, but as I said, this is not at all an exhaustive list. if you Google S3 IAM actions, you'll see a lot of other actions available. And don't get intimidated, because we do not work on IAM as much as a data engineer. This is something which is done either by the cloud administrator or the security administrator. So let's get into action. What I'll do is that first I'll create an user or an IAM user, and I'll use identity based policies to give S3 access, right? So now again, this is I have logged in using the root account. So as you can see, this is my root account actually, and I'll be creating an IAM user. Let me name it as S3 read user, and I'll be creating the IAM user. I'll not be using IAM identity center, and I'll provide a custom password, and I'll uncheck this, that user must create a new password. And now I'll not attach any policies as of now, so I'll be creating my own policy. Click next and create the user. So now, before attaching policies and permissions, let me see whether what access does this user have. And this is the console sign in, and I'm using Chrome browser, and I'll have to open a private browsing, and you already know why if you have gone through the IAM session. So now, using this private browsing, I'll give the username. Okay, now let's sign in, and as usual, the user will not have any access at all. The user will not be able to see anything, no EC2 access, no VPC access, and no S3 access also. So the entire page would be all red because the user does not have any access. I'm not bothered about any other access. I'm bothered about S3 access. So let's go to S3. And in S3 also, this user will not have any access. The user can't even see the buckets. So let me select the buckets option, and the user can't see buckets because this particular user, which is S3 underscore read underscore user under this account, does not have any permission. So now what I'll have to do is that I'll be creating an identity based policy where I'll use EAR, effect, action, and resource. And I'll give only specific bucket access. So now what will I do is that I'll be creating a policy. Now before creating the policy, let's see the buckets that I have. So these are the buckets. I have 3IAM Athena dataset, 3IAM S3 bucket, and then we have test data bucket. Now 3IAM Athena dataset has a lot of files. The files would be used in Athena's chapter for the hands-on. So I'll use this particular bucket, 3IAM Athena dataset, and provide access to this particular bucket itself. So right now, the user can't even see the buckets, right? So this is the root user. And if I go back, it does not have access to list the buckets. Now the question is, how do you list buckets? And this is the permission that is needed, that is S3 list all my buckets. So this is the action that I'll have to provide in the policy that I am going to create, IAM policy. Okay, so now what will I do is that I will use only one policy, and I'll improvise that. Okay, so let us go ahead and create a policy, and I'll use JSON. This is the policy, and what I have mentioned, the statement ID, which is list all buckets in an account. Effect is allow, action is list all my buckets because that's what I need, and resources, all the resources. Why all the resources? Because I am giving this user to see all the buckets, just see the buckets, that's it, or listing the buckets. And click on next, and I'll name it as 3IAM S3 read policy, and I'll create this policy. Now if you have seen in this policy, again, just let me open the policy and show you. So this is the policy, 3IAM S3 read policy, and if I click on JSON, it will show me the policy. So what I have mentioned EAR or year. So effect, action, and resource. Effect is allow, action is S3 list all my buckets, and the resource is star because I want this user to see all the buckets. Now of course I'll have to attach this particular policy or permission to S3 read user. So click on this and then add permissions. I'll attach policies directly, and I'll have to use customer managed policy, which is this one, 3IAM S3 read policy. Click on next and then add permissions. Okay, I have been signed out, so I'll have to sign in again. So I was signed out because I was logged into this particular dashboard for quite some time now. This is the root user actually, so I have been using root user, so that's why I was signed out. So now let's see whether the policy has been attached or not. So no resources to display. Let me add the policy again. So the permissions has been added to the user, so the policy has been added to the user rather. Now if I do a refresh, I should be able to see the buckets, all the buckets rather, but I'll not be able to see the objects inside of the bucket. So as you can see, again I'm using S3 read user and I can see all the buckets. Now if I click the bucket and get inside of it, it will show me that I do not have permission. So it is insufficient permission to list objects. So now I'll have to provide the S3 list bucket action. I'll have to add that. I'll do it, but let me show you a few more buckets. So this is 3IAM Athena dataset. Then we have 3IAM S3 bucket. I do not have permission to this bucket also. I cannot see the objects and the folders in 3IAM S3 bucket as well. And let me show you one more bucket, which is www.3iam.in. Again, I do not have any permission to see the objects and the folders in this bucket also. Now what will I do is that I'll add one more permission to this user so that this user can see the objects only for 3IAM dataset S3 bucket, not for any other buckets. I'll have to again use the root user, and let me open the policies in a new tab. And this is the policy. Let me edit. And now what will I have to do is that I'll have to create one more statement for the list bucket action. But before that, let me get the ARN of the bucket. So click on the bucket and go to properties, and here I can get the ARN of the bucket. So I have added this particular statement, list all objects in a specific bucket, and I'm giving list bucket and describe star permission. Describe star is not needed, but I'm just adding it as a safekeeping if needed. And as you can see, what I have done here is that I have added the 3IAM Athena dataset ARN, right? So this is the ARN that I'll have to add, and I'm not giving access to any other bucket whatsoever. Now again click on next and I'll save the changes. So the permissions have been changed. Now I am using S3 read user. I'll have to refresh. Now let's look at the other two buckets first. So look at the 3IAM www.3iam.in bucket, and I do not have any permission. I can't see the objects in this bucket. Let me look at 3IAM S3 bucket, and I should not have permission here as well. But if I click on 3IAM Athena dataset, I should be able to see the objects and the folders that are inside of this bucket. Now, as you can see, these are the folders that I have, and I can actually look at the datasets inside of that bucket also. So these are the two datasets, customers underscore 1 CSV, customer underscore 2 CSV. And I can look at all the other buckets also, all the other folders also rather. But if I want to upload a file, I'll not be able to do so because I do not have any write permission. So I'm trying to upload this orders underscore 2 underscore 10 CSV. Now if I click on upload, it will give me error that I do not have access. So as you can see, the user S3 read user is not authorized to perform S3 put object on resource this object, right? So because I do not have S3 put object action in that policy, which is fine. This is intentional. Now what will I do is that I'll not allow this user to upload any data in 3IAM dataset, but I'll allow this user to upload files in 3IAM S3 bucket, right? So that's what I'll do because I do not want to disturb the data that is present here, because this is a critical data set for me, because this has important information. So I do not want to make any changes here. And this bucket was created for S3 hands-on only, and I'll be deleting this bucket once S3 hands-on is done. So let me go ahead and provide access to this bucket, 3IAM S3 bucket. Currently, if I open this, I do not have any permission whatsoever. Again, I will edit the policy using root user. So I have logged in using root user, as you can see. And let me add one more statement, but before adding the statement, I'll have to get the ARN of 3IAM S3 bucket. So this is the statement. Now, what have I done here? I have still described star and list bucket because, of course, to upload an object, I need to see the object also. So that's why I have given S3 list bucket. And the bucket name is different. So earlier I had 3IAM Athena dataset. Now here I have added 3IAM S3 bucket. And I have also added 3IAM S3 bucket slash star because I want to give upload object access. Now here the first resource is for describe and list bucket, and the second resource is for the put action, and it should not be put star. I can just mention put object, and in the command sheet I think I have pasted it as put star. That is also fine, and put object is also fine. Now I can go ahead and save this, and I can save the changes. So the changes have been saved, and now again I'm inside 3IAM S3 bucket. As you can see, I do not have any permissions. Now if I refresh, I should be able to see the objects inside of this bucket. So as you can see, I have access to all the objects and the folders inside of 3IAM S3 dataset, 3IAM S3 bucket. And these are the files which were already there. But now what will I do is I will try to upload an object. So I'm trying the same file, orders underscore 2 underscore 10.csv. And this time I should not get any error because I have provided permission to upload this object. So now as you can see, the object is getting uploaded. So the upload is done, and now I can close it. And this is the file. So because I uploaded the file, let me try to delete it also. And I should not be able to delete it because I have not provided any access to delete an object. So again, the same problem, access denied, right? So now you know what to do. You have to go and change the policy and delete object also. So let me change the policy. Here I'll edit and I will add a new action S3 delete object. And I want this user to delete all the objects. I'm not mentioning any object as such. So let's say if I have to give action at object level, then in that case you'll have to provide the ARN of the object in a separate statement. This statement will not work. We'll have to add a new statement wherein you have to mention delete object, and then in the resource you'll have to provide the ARN of the object. Now how do you get the ARN of the object? Go to the bucket, go inside of that object, and here itself you will get the ARN of the object. If I have to give object level permission, I'll have to create one more statement and I'll have to provide the permission there. But right now I will not do that. I'll just save the changes here. And one more thing, you can have a maximum of 4 version of IAM policy. So currently if you see there are 4 policy versions, and I'll delete the older 3 because if I upload the 5th one and then I try to upload the 6th one, it will give me error. Alright, so now I should be able to delete. So as you can see, now this time the delete was successful because I added delete object permission. Now if I want to delete some data set in 3IAM Athena dataset, let's say customers, and I want to delete customer underscore 2, I should not be able to do so because I have only read permission on this particular object. So as you can see, access is denied. And this is how you can use identity based policies where we use year, effect, action, and resource to provide access to S3 buckets and objects.